Well, welcome to this special presentation. My name is Brendan. I am the High Performance Manager at Athletics Ontario, and I've got two very special guests today. We're talking today with Bill Crothers. Bill Crothers is an amazing Hall of Fame athlete from Canada. 57 years ago, he was on the track that the athletes are currently on in Tokyo, and he won a silver medal in the 800 meters. And we thought it would be a pretty perfect time and place and person to be able to chat about that performance and about some of the things that are happening this year. So first of all, Bill, welcome, and thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Glad to be here.
We're in sort of the last sort of few days of competition, but tell us some of your highlights so far for this Tokyo Olympics and what you've seen so far on the TV.
Well, to me, I find it very, very fascinating because up until now, the only men who have won medals in this year's Olympics for Canada are track and field. Every other sport, it's all female. There are no female medalists to date, anyway, in track and field for Canada. So the track and field team seems to be a bit of an anomaly because the women are absolutely excelling in every sport, and in track and field, it's the men that are excelling. So, I don't think it says anything except that it's very interesting.
It is interesting. It's been a little bit of discussion around that. Do you have any theories on that, Bill?
No, I don't. No, I really don't. I don't know what the reason. I mean, track and field is one of the oldest sports, and I think when they introduced new sports and new events, the Canadian women seem to be as well or better prepared than women in almost any other country of the world. So they, mind you, back in '64, the Canadian team, the whole team there were twice as many males as there were females on the team, and there were twice as many events for males as for females. And I think track and field was exactly the same, that there were half as many events for females as there were for males. Today, it's almost even. So there's been quite a transition. And, you know, today, the level of competition is so much deeper. My event is an example. My event, the winner in '64, basically the same time as the winner in 2021. Peter Snell was 145.1, and the winner here was 145.1. The big difference, of course, is the depth. I mean, there were the semifinals in the 800 meters this year. All 8 of them ran 144, between 144 and 145, and there were 8 other athletes who ran 144 who didn't make the final. So the depth in so many of the competitions, and in particular in track and field, is so much deeper than it as it has been for a long, long time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's just have to run 144 just to make the final of the major championship is you know, it's incredible. Yeah. And you said that the depth is just phenomenal.
Yeah, I think there's another factor in play. Like this morning I saw on Facebook, Mickey Snell, Peter's wife, sent a thing and commenting on times, etc. But to me, one of the truly fascinating things is that so many, I can't say most, but an awful lot of today's runners don't know how to race. The races the big races that they run in, with the exception of the multi-sport games, are all set up with a rabbit, a pace setter, and there's no major congestion or anything like that. So they don't know how to race, and they don't know how to handle the crowding. I watched Almut in his 5,000 meter silver medal today, and he never left the inside of the first lane. When I ran my 800 in Tokyo in '64, I never put one foot in the inside lane. I ran in lane 2 for the whole distance, and there were 2 reasons there. One is I didn't want to get boxed in or get tripped up. And the other one was that the track in 64 was a crushed brick track, and the lanes weren't put on or painted on. They were plastic, a strip of plastic nailed into the track. And for some reason, I didn't want to step on them because I didn't know what would happen if you if you did. I also didn't want to get boxed. But today, the runners don't seem to be able to handle that. I mean, Peter, in 64, Peter was boxed in. He just pointed that he wanted out, and they let him out into lane 2 and going around the third bend in the race, so that he was free and going down the backstretch. But going into the bell lap, he was boxed in.
Well, you've just touched on
Pardon?
You've just touched on so many things I want to cover, Bill. But you did mention the race specifically, so let's possibly have a look at that.
Okay. I don't even remember what lane I was in. Oh, there I met about lane 4.
I think you might have started in 4 or 5, yeah.
Yeah.
You are 5th place at the moment. But you always had such a really good kick at the end, Bill, with your 400-meter speed. But that sounds like something that would also be a reason why you'd not want to get too close to lane 1, especially when, as you say, Peter got boxed in on that 300-meter mark, had to break his way through to make that final stretch. How well do you remember this race, Bill?
I'm sorry?
How well do you remember this race?
Oh, I don't remember a whole lot about it, except that when Peter went by us, just going into the last bend, and then he started to pull away, and I stayed outside, and I didn't want to get boxed in. And Peter's opening up there, going around that bend. Mm-hmm. He opened up a lead, and that was it. I couldn't track it down, and it was the fastest time I ever ran. So I have no regrets, or I've never rerun that race, to be honest.
Well, you mentioned something earlier, which I think is worth sort of talking about as well, because you said that athletes at the moment don't tend to race as well, in your words. They don't know how to race as well. And I mean, you guys, you had to do a heat, a semi, and a final all in 3 days, whereas now they've got 2-3 days in between each of the rounds. It's a very different sort of competition almost.
Yeah, that's true. We had on the first day of track was the heat. The second day was the semifinal. The third day was the final. On the 4th day, Peter had a heat in the 1500 meters. I had a heat and a quarterfinal in the 400 meters. And day 5, I had the semifinal in the 400 meters. So I had actually 6 races in 5 days at the games. I didn't make the final. Peter then had a day off before he had the semifinal in the 1500s. But he told me afterwards, he says that heat he was most vulnerable then, because that was the fourth consecutive race.
Of course.
Now, our semifinals weren't as fast as they are now, because the depth of the competition, but we both won our semifinal heats. And it was the same as this year. It was 3 heats, the first 2 to qualify, and then the 2 fastest non-qualifiers.
I mean, that schedule that you just mentioned, to go all 3 rounds, not even a full day, and then into the next round of 400 or 1500s for Peter. But I mean, with all of the sports medicine and the sports science that's available now, I'm curious how you approach those rounds. What did you eat? What did you do to recover? How did you approach getting back on the track for the next day?
Nothing different, just rested. Nothing different than any other case. You just had to race. The race came up, you had to do it. Now, mind you, the first 2 rounds weren't that fast in the 800, not by today's standards. They were by our standards, but not by today's standards.
Yeah. Did you have any particular, meals or certain things that you were superstitious around competition that you kind of needed to do to get back for the next day, for the next competition?
Oh, well, yeah. The one sensation that I remember most of all is if you got nervous before you raced. And you got nervous basically for 2 reasons. One, the nervous about the race itself, and then nervous that if you did qualify, you had to do it again the next day. If you didn't, you were finished. But so there were two reasons for the nervousness. But you got nervous before every competition.
Yeah, of course. And you mentioned the track before, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that because especially when you were competing, tracks evolved quite a lot, and you would have experienced a lot of different surfaces. How did you find the evolution of the tracks that you ran on?
Well, see, I ran in the first really big competition that they had on an all-weather track or a composition track, and that was the AAU, the American AAU Championships in '63. They were in St. Louis, and that was the first really big competition that was run on a composition track. I won the race. I think I became the last non-American to win one of their national championships because they changed their bylaws that summer and wouldn't allow non-citizens to compete in their national championships. But I set an American record for the 880 yards as it was then. But the one huge impact that we noticed was the hurdlers were having trouble because they were coming up. They were having trouble with their steps between the hurdle, both in the men's case, both the high hurdlers and the 400-meter hurdlers. And so they had to do a little bit of work. In my event, we just ran, and you ran according to what you felt like and what the competition was. If it was a fast race, you ran fast. If it was a slow race, you ran slow, because I didn't. I never led any of my races, not until the end.
So did you feel and notice the difference in how the track felt when it started to get more towards these all-weather tracks? Did you get on these new tracks and say, wow, this feels fast, this feels great?
Well, of course, because the as I said, I ran until, well, I ran in Mexico, but I didn't. The only thing I ran in Mexico was that. So I didn't run in a whole lot, and most of the meets that I ran in Europe after '64 were still the old tracks. They were not the composition tracks. So I didn't have too many races on the composition tracks. The one that I remember best of all was the one in St. Louis, because that was the first major competition that was held on a composition track. The reputation of the tracks around the world, the one in Oslo and Bislett Stadium had a pretty good reputation, particularly for the distance runners. And it was just a crushed brick kind of a track, but the climate and everything around the thing Ronnie Clark set his world record in the 10,000 meters on that track. May have even had a 5,000 meter record on that track. So I didn't really have too many composition tracks, so I don't. I know they were fast, and the big change with the length of the spikes, of course.
That was my next question.
Yeah, well, and in one way, I was not unused to that because I ran a lot of indoor races, and in indoor meets, you had to wear the pin spikes. And for the first 3 or 4 years that I ran indoors, I had to grind down my own spikes. My father was a carpenter, so we had a grinder in the basement. So I would take the spikes and I would grind them down to the proper length to run on the indoor tracks until one year, because in those days, Puma and Adidas were basically the only shoes that were available. And I used to use the Adidas, and they would give me shoes to race in, but they didn't give the pin spikes. One year, the Puma, one of the representatives of Puma, I think, wife was training with us or something like that, and she talked me into taking a pair of Puma indoor stripes, pin stripes, and ran in Winnipeg. And Ray Sheely, who had introduced Adidas to Canada, he saw a picture of me on the newspapers on Monday morning from my race in Winnipeg, and he says, "Congratulations," but he says, "Bill, you broke my heart." And he says, "You wore a pair of Pumas." So I says, "Well, I've been grinding mine down, and they offered me to run in a pair of their pin spikes." And Adidas had a pair of pin spikes for me before the next weekend for the races. So then I would use the pin spikes. But up until that point, I ground them down. So I knew what the pin spikes now. And of course, now they're the spikes have completely changed, and I don't even think I recognize the spikes anymore.
And I'm assuming that back then there was no contracts, there was no $1 million agreements. It was just, "Do you want to wear my spikes? If you don't, no worries."
Yeah. If I mean, what they did was they gave us spikes. We'll give you spikes. You don't have to buy the shoes. That was what we got. And one of the memories I have of Tokyo, and this is the days of Avery Brundage and the strict amateurism. And the day after, I think it was the day after or so, was asked to go to the TV studio to do an interview. And when I arrived there, they were interviewing Abibi Bakila. And I remember the interviewer says, "Abibi, in Rome, you won the marathon and you run barefoot. In Tokyo, you won the marathon and you wore shoes. Was there any reason?" And he just spurted out, "Because they paid me." And this was the day of Avery Brundage. It just completely shocked me that he was so open about the thing. But no, we didn't. There was money. The way my coach handled that stuff, and because some of them were getting payments for indoor meets and that, and a lot of the European promoters were using enticements. What our coach did was he said to the indoor meets, we get an invitation. He says, "You want Bruce and you want Bill. I'd like you to take a relay team, either a 4x1 or a 400-meter relay or a 4x200-meter relay, and Bill will run it as well. So you'll get him to run twice, but you'll pay for 3 other guys to come to the meet." So they would do that. Most of the East Coast ones didn't, and California they would balk at it. But so that way, the guys I trained with got to run indoor meets in New York, Boston, Chicago, some of those places like that. But that's the way our coach was a little bit more religious than most of the others were. So, but we liked it because it meant that 6 or 7 of us got to travel to the meet instead of just 2 of us.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there is a number of sort of running geeks out there that are quite curious as to what a normal training week would look like for you 57 years ago. Yeah, 57 years ago.
it depended on the time of the year because we trained at different spots. In the summertime, we were at East York Stadium, which is the high school, a crushed brick track. In the fall, or in the wintertime, we'd be at the University of Toronto for about a month after we went off, because the university track meets were held in the fall in those days. So we would train at Varsity Stadium for a month or so, or until early November, till the university competition was over. And then we would train on the back campus at the University of Toronto, outside Harthouse. And around the field was about 600 yards, something to that effect. And then when we got to December, then we would go indoors. And for the first week or two, we trained in outdoors, which is more distance training, and then go up and get our feet used to the Harthouse track, which is about 13 laps to the mile. And it was around the top of a basketball gym with the iron railings. And we would run there during the indoor season. And then when the indoor season finished, we'd go over to Riverdale Park. And we would train, or we would change at the university, run over to Riverdale Park, and then run the hills over there. And that was, we never did weight training. The equivalent to weight training that we did is we sprinted up hills. And then when the high school track was ready, the weather was, we'd go to the East York track. I remember one year we went to I guess it was 61, 62, maybe it was 62. I was invited to go to the Compton relays in, I think it was Compton, one of the relays in Los Angeles at any rate. And we hadn't even been on a track. So we had been running the hills in part, and to get a little bit of speed training, we ran sort of 50 or 60 yard sprints on the sidewalk where the hills were. I went to California and I ran 46.2 for a 440 yards, which was about the third or fourth fastest time in the world that year. But no training on the track. We just come off the indoor season, did a little bit of hill work, and did some sprint work on the sidewalks at Riverdale Park. We had a lot of interesting things, but we had fun. Most of anything we had fun, and I shocked myself. I shocked my teammates too when I ran that fast. But,
well, you did hold the Canadian record for the 400, the 800, and the 1500. What was your favorite to compete in?
Probably the 800. And yet, in high school, the first track meets I went in, I ran the 100, the low hurdles, and the 400. I never broke 2 minutes as a high school half miler. The first time I got under 2 minutes for the half mile was in a training session one summer, and the coach, Fred Foote, he said, "Bill, Stan Worsfold." Stan had been a Canadian 800 meter runner in the Pan Ams in '59, and Ron Wallingford in 5,000 meters Pan Ams in Indianapolis, I think it was, in 1959. He says, "They're going through an easy half mile run. Why don't you just get in behind them and see how you feel? If you're tired, then don't worry about it. If you feel good, well, then, run what you can." I ran 152. That was the first time I'd ever broken 2 minutes for
But the first time under 2 minutes was 152, and that was just a casual run joining a couple of other guys.
Yeah, it was a time trial with the others. It was a time trial as far as Fred was concerned. But,
Sure.
It was just a run through, and that's when I became a half miler.
And did you beat the other two guys?
Oh yeah, I ran away from them. I ran away from them at the end, but I, that was my introduction to. I'd run half miles in high school, but never that. I had a distinct reputation. I ran at OFSA a couple of times when I was junior and intermediate or whatever the categories were then. But in those days, there was a runner at my high school, Agincourt, who always finished second in the 800, the 880-yard dash at the TDIA championships. And Jimmy Irons, who was in Brampton, an athlete, he would win the 800, or the 880, the mile, and the 2-mile run. But when they went to OFSA, they were only allowed to run twice in 2 different events. So Irons would choose the 2-mile and the 1-mile, and my coach would say, if Colin Dungy was a teammate, he's running the 880. I've got another fellow in my class, in my school, who'll take Jim's place and run the 880. Well, first time I ran the Austin, the 880, I finished dead last. That was in the 880. Now, by the time I got to grade 12 and 13, grade 12, I finished second in the 440. And in grade 13, I won the 440, but in grade 12, we also won the 4x440 relay. So it wasn't, when I started high school, I was 5 feet tall. When I got to grade 12, I was 6 feet tall. But
I think that's a great story for young aspiring athletes, that your first ever OFSA event, you came dead last.
I came dead last, yeah. Well, that's what I used to always tell, if you want to be good, you don't have to learn how to win. You have to learn how to lose. Then you learn how to win.
You said before that one of the things that you tended to do when you were racing in the 800 was to give yourself space, stay in lane 2, make sure you were staying out of trouble. How else would you describe your race tactics and what the things that you were well known for when you were racing in the 800?
Oh, I was a kicker. I never led the race. I always followed, and then I would kick the last 200 meters or thereabouts in the race. But that was mine. Mine was just to follow and not get too far behind, and stay on the leader's shoulder. Whoever's leading the race, that was my tactic. And for the most part, it would work.
Did you ever try anything different? Maybe going out a little bit harder in the first lap to see if you could?
No, well, no, I learned that, and I probably did that in 400s. And because in a 400, you'll tie up if you go out too fast. But one of the things that we learned was how to relax. And the crazy part is that I could run under 22 seconds for a 220, but if I ran in a race, if I ran 22 seconds, I would be very comfortable. If I tried to run 21 seconds, I would tie up. So what I learned was that, the difference between being comfortable and tying up is not that great. So you'll learn how to relax in the first part of the race. I remember when a fellow named Don Smith, who was a New Zealander, and he had run with the guys in New Zealand, and we ran an 800 meter or an 880-yard race, and he was built. He says, I saw you when we had about 300 yards to go, and your shoulders were so relaxed. He says, I knew it was over. So that was what we did. A lot of our running was pace work. We didn't do any weight training. We just, and my coach was pace work. And, so you get to, once in a while, we had a speed workout. Then when we did those kind of workouts, like maybe four 220s in under 22 seconds, with a very short break in between, or
Wow.
4 quarters at 50 seconds or better with a very, very short break between them. Your legs were tired that night, but our coach never had 2 really tough workouts on consecutive nights. We had a tough one night, we had a recovery workout the following night, and it worked.
I think those what you just said, those workouts were, I think, would make any good athlete even today cringe on how they would feel afterwards.
Yeah, well, my coach was pretty good, but he originally was a sprint coach. He was originally a sprinter, but he was impacted by Franz Stampfel, who I guess it was fartlek that he used in Europe, and then Arthur Linder. And it was all bulky stuff with a lot of bulky training and stamina work. And Fred used a combination of such, but because of our weather and because Fred was also the track coach at the University of Toronto as well as the East York Track Club, we had different seasons and very, very different training things. So you never really got completely bored with the kind of training you did, because by the time it's feeling a little tedious, it's time to switch to a different technique. And I guess that was the way that we got around keeping interested and building up your strength at certain times of the year and building up your speed at other times of the year. I was lucky.
What was your absolute favorite training session? The favorite workout that you just loved to do?
Oh, I don't know. We'd have maybe a dozen. We used to just sort of jog into them and run into them. A dozen 220s at 24, 25 seconds, and the value of that is that you did a lot of them at what you're aiming to be your race speed. So if you could do quite a bunch of 200 meters at 25 seconds with a very, very short recovery, well, then that's a 50-second lap. 2 50-second laps is 140.
Yeah.
So that was and that was I think the main reason why Fred did that way is got you used to running race speed. Once in a while, you'd have things so that you'd build on that, but most of them were designed to get you used to running race speed, so that it was easy and it was comfortable, and you still sometimes like you couldn't control it on the half-mile races because we were running them as time trials. So inevitably there was a couple seconds split between the first lap and the second lap, unless the first lap was very slow. And that was another thing in the 800 semifinals. If you watch them and you really measure the things, I mean, just going by what you would see on the clock when they went through the 400 meters, 2 of the heats in the semifinals, they went through at 52 seconds. The third one, they went through at 51 seconds. But the final, they didn't go anywhere close to that. There was nobody taking that pace. And I think the winner might have even had a negative split. He may have run the second lap faster than the first lap. That's, I guess, the only guy that could do that might have been the world record holder.
Yes.
That's another interesting thing too. What's his name? Kenyan.
Rudisha. David Rudisha.
Yeah, I ran against his dad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, his dad was a 400-meter runner, and pretty young then. And his dad was a member of the 4x400-meter silver medalist in '68 in Mexico.
Wow.
He was pretty young then, Radisha, he came by his speed pretty honestly, and his dad was a quarter miler, and but again, he was I suspect the kind of training that he must have done was just to get speed, and so how can I maintain that speed for the whole distance? Because in London, when he set the world record, he led it from start to finish. So and that seems to be the pattern that a lot of the 800-meter runners that were in Tokyo this year, they were running as if they were time trials, and but without having to ever face the consequences of running in a tight group where tactics were important. You had to stay out of trouble, and you had to maintain, and sometimes you gave away a little bit somewhere else so that you didn't give it away in the nets. I ran in the second lane, so you run a little bit extra distance, but you don't have to worry about somebody tripping you or you tripping somebody else. It did happen to me once. It happened to me once indoors. It's a little bit different and that's one of the advantages that we had. You run indoors. If they run 1,000-yard race indoors, when I was running, they put 11 or 12 guys on this little wooden track.
Oh, wow.
So in a 600-yard, they would have a half a dozen runners, a little bit faster. But so you learn how to do that. And I was in Los Angeles at an indoor meet once, and somebody clipped my heel, and I went head over heels in the infield, and then got up and missed winning the race by a photo finish, but lots far behind. And they actually gave me athlete of the meet for finishing second. Paul, that's funny.
I love that.
Paul, you know why I wanted, when you had the members, introducing the Hall of Fame members for the Ontario one, I tried to get in, and I want to talk about Warren Wallingford, because I wanted to mention to him that he was one of the guys who was responsible for me becoming a half miler. Because I was in a race with him. That's the first time I broke 4 minutes, or broke 2 minutes for a half mile, was running with him and Stan Worsfold.
Well, why don't you take this moment to share what you want to share there, and we'll make sure that he sees this.
Oh, all I wanted to mention is what I've already said, is that Fred just said Wallingford and Worsfold are going to go through just a bit of a time trial, half mile. Why don't you just get in behind them and see what you feel like? And fine, I'm sure I felt kind of tired in the first 400 meters, but after that I felt really good. And that's when I really became I think that's when Fred decided for sure that I was going to be a half miler and not necessarily a quarter miler. That's all I was going to mention at that particular time. But that's why I'm using my wife's laptop, because it never did solve the problem with the sound on my computer.
Mm. Well, of course, Bill, I followed your career quite a bit later than you. But at the time that I was running, you were still the Canadian record holder in the early 80s when I started. Well,
I think it's good for about 29 years or somewhere.
Yes,
some ridiculous time. But.
It stood until 1988, and I similar to you, I started in the 400 meters. Actually, I started in the 100s and 200 meters, and when I got to high school, they decided to switch me over to the 200 and 400 meters because I wasn't fast enough in the 100. And I, like you, my first round at OFSA, when I was in grade 9, I made it to OFSA, and it was, of course, extremely happy just to make it there. And of course, I didn't make the finals in the 400. And then in grade 11, my coach just said to me, why don't you run an 800? Why don't you just, give it a go? You seem to do well in the 400. And I'll tell you, I was scared out of my wits to run 2 laps. I'd never run more than 2 miles straight in my life. And so running an 800 was quite something. And like you, I was very much of a kicker. And I think sprinters tend to be more of that because they can just kind of hang on and then use that last bit of reserve that they haven't used, even though they're tired. And so that year in grade 11, I won OFSA 800 after having not made the final of an OFSA race the 2 years previously in the 400. And then that kind of started me along the way. And I don't know if you remember, but there was a couple of years ago when we had a fundraiser at the University of Toronto. Of course, I followed in your footsteps to Toronto.
You were born the year in 64.
Yes.
And then what's her name from
Melissa
area was born in 88.
That's right. Yeah. So you were born in you ran at the Olympics in
40, but I ran in 64.
Yeah.
I 68 as well, but 64 was my medal.
64 was when you won, and that was the year I was born. And then I made the 88 Olympic team, which was the year that Melissa Bishop was born. And of course, we were all there at the same fundraiser. And I just thought that was kind of serendipitous. And got a photo of us. I still have the photo of us, and I thought that was a pretty cool thing. But believe me, I following in your footsteps at U of T, was chasing all of their records, and never did get your 800 record. I think I managed to get your 600, but probably only because you didn't run very many 600s. I still actually have the Ontario record for the 600 meters indoors in Ontario. So that's my claim to fame, and that stood since 1985. And every year when the universities get going, I watch the athletes coming along and say, "Is this the year that my Ontario 600 meter record goes down?" And so far, it hasn't happened, but it will one of these days. But I'm curious about one thing that I think is very germane to you and your era, in that right now we hear a lot about the new technologies with all the shoes. There's been movies made, and they've had lots of controversies over, is it fair that these, runners these days are wearing these super shoes, they call them, and breaking all the world records. And, people are saying, well, is it really fair? It's just technical advantage, etc. And yet, you went through something similar, as most of your performances and your times and records were all done on cinder tracks. Yeah. And then right after comes the composite tracks, which of course are much faster, and the technology is much faster. Did you feel somewhat similar? Did you feel that, well, this is not fair because they've got new technology, the records, etc.?
I don't think so. Because the year, like 63, the year before the Olympics, I won the American AEU 880 yard, and I set an American record, 146.8. But the following year, on a crushed brick track, I ran 145.6. So, which is half a second faster than on the track. So that was not a big deal. The spikes that we wore were different, and I'm sure that we could have run faster on the composite tracks if we had a chance, because I know what I did on the one big race that I had on a composite track. But things change. I mean, nowadays, all these top runners, I don't know if the Kenyans do it, but the weight training and they've got these nutritionists, and they've got all sorts of support thing. We had a coach. The coach was a psychologist. Yeah. He arranged the competitions. He did everything. Yeah. One person, and it wasn't even a full-time. Like my coach was an accountant with the Metropolitan Toronto Police. He was the budget chief, and he used to deliver the budgets to the city council for the Metro Police, for the Toronto Police, I guess at that time. But no, I don't think so. But I mean, things change. I mean, we did what we did, and I suspect the top runners today would still be the top runners, or at least the top runners in my day would still be the top runners if they were competing and training and such under the same conditions that they're doing now. But I'm not sure I would have wanted to, because I was running, I was going to school, then I was working. We had multifaceted lives. We weren't full-time athletes or such. So we had the best of both worlds. And I'm not the least bit envious of the new, but we recognize that times evolve, times change. I know in my particular case, for about the first 5 or 6 Olympics that followed Tokyo, my time would have put me in the top 3 or 4 in every single Olympic final, save one. And it wasn't really until Rhodesia came along that the record started to dive. And now, now you see what happened in Tokyo. 16 guys run 144 in the semifinal heat. 16 of them.
Yeah.
And we went 145.1, 145.6, 145.9, 145.9. That was it. But some of those guys would have had trouble then because they wouldn't have survived the competition, the kinds of competition and the strategies that you had to do. And we never had to learn that much because there were never that many that we had to cope with. So it's different.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm sure that those guys, 144, some of them was probably their best time ever, but I'm sure that half of those guys had run faster, but in rabbited races.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you.
There and then they spring it behind them. And the only time they ever have any real competition is for the last 200 meters.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I see all of the new technology coming out and training techniques and whatever else. And I just think it's a good thing. I just think anything that improves the performances doesn't take away from the past performances. It just creates the new performances. And I think that we as human beings also want to see and see improvement. So it's great to see that. But it would be interesting to take.
What are you, 6 foot? You're about 6'2", 6'3"?
Six,
How tall are you?
just about
Fine.
6'2", 6'1" and a half, 6'2".
Yeah, and I was 5'11" and 3/4 or something like that. So I mean, size makes a difference. And but then I remember 1956 Olympics. Bronze medalist in the 100 meters was about 5'5", 5'4".
Right.
It's you can't tell, and things change. People have a more affluent life today than they did in our day.
Indeed.
Competition will evolve.
Well, Bill, look, we might let you be for the afternoon. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's really great to have you on and to meet you and hear some of your experiences. I did want to leave you a fairly open-ended question though, and I know there's going to be a lot of young athletes and kids that are seeing the amazing performances at the Olympics, especially the Canadians. And I'm wondering if you had a bit of a message for any aspiring Olympian for the future, or anyone even just thinking about getting involved in athletics.
Well, I guess I've got a couple of messages. I used to go into schools an awful lot and talk to kids. And one of the messages that I used to always deliver was that every single one of you can do something better than everybody else in your class. The challenge is finding what it is and doing it, and most people never find that out. So, do as many things as you can, do them as well as you can, and get lots of variety. If they're an aspiring athlete, one of the messages that I would say is the person who's number one when they're 12 or 13 almost never is number one when they're in their 20s. Because systems, people change, people mature at different rates. So, you apply yourself, you do as best you can. And if you get lucky, if you get good, fine. If you don't, you've had a really good time and you've learned something by trying. That's basically the message that I would give. As I mentioned there, when I started high school, I was 5 feet tall. Best I ever finished in a race in elementary school was 4th in my class. Wasn't until I got to high school where I started to grow, and I enjoyed it. And I did a number of things, and I tried a lot of things, and I still do. I still play a bit of golf. I still play ice hockey. Not very good, but I still play. But I got good at track.
I think, Paul, you had a somewhat similar journey as well, where you didn't really come into your own until well after high school finished. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had some decent success in grade 11 and 12 when I started running the 800. And I think it was more luck than anything else. And it was also because at the time, 400-meter runners weren't running 800s. And so it was more of a distance event. And so a sprinter had an advantage if he could just hang on, would generally be able to outkick in the end, which is kind of what I did. I think I won all my races by less than half a meter when I won them, and I never ever was leading at the bell ever. But it was in university when I got to University of Toronto and started having a more serious approach to training. And also I wasn't doing every sport. When I was in high school, I did every sport. I did soccer, I did football, I did basketball, I did volleyball, and I did track. So, there was none of that specialization when we were in school. So it's hard to excel or beat somebody who that's all they're doing is just track. I was training with a fellow who was in high school running 70-mile weeks. I was like, I was lucky to do 10 or 15 miles in a week, not 70 miles in a week. So of course he was doing, extremely, extremely well. But then in university, when I started to apply myself, it was about third year of university when I really said, hey, you know what? I actually have something here I might be fairly decent at. And over the next 3 years, just focused just on track and not on other sports, and had some decent success. Unfortunately, I was my own worst enemy, as I liked to do every event. So a typical day for me at an indoor, Ontario Championships at the university would be me running the 300, the 600, the 4x2, the 4x4, and the 4x8 on one weekend. And I remember coming away with 4 golds and a bronze medal. The bronze was in the 300 and gold in all the other ones at one of our Ontario Championships. But I consistently was injured because I was just doing too much, and I wasn't very good at telling my coach how much I hurt. And so I would just train through the injuries until it got to a point where I just couldn't go any further. So I don't remember actually running any races after I was about 22 without ever being somewhat injured during them. Even when I went to the Olympics, I hadn't done almost any training 6 weeks before because I had hurt my hamstring so badly. And we went to Japan actually just before Korea to train, and we were supposed to do a preparatory meet there. And I remember talking to the team coach who was there, and he was also a doctor. And he told me, he said, no, you should not, absolutely, you definitely can't run. You should not be running. I was like, yeah, but I can't. He said, you're just going to make it worse. You're just going to, hurt yourself. So he didn't, and he helped me along for the next 2-3 weeks. And then I ran my 3rd fastest time in the heats of the 800 at the Olympics. So I was ecstatic to even be able to get to that point in competing. But yeah, I was my own worst enemy with racing too hard and not taking enough time to rest.
Well, I think there's a good message there from Bill on being patient and diversifying it at the start of your career, and then a good message from you, Paul, on what not to do.
Yeah.
When I was in university, I was running track and field, and we did the track meets in the fall, and then we had all the indoor meets. But I did a lot of other things. I played, I played a lot of intramural sports for the pharmacy team in there. I played soccer. I played ice hockey one year with them. I even played a couple of water polo games, almost rounds. And I played a couple of basketball games. Never good, but just did it because we had fun. I remember they did Sports Illustrated did an article on the one year, because in Boston, we used to have our indoor meets on Saturday evening, and inevitably I would run a 1,000-yard race and then a 4x8 800 relay afterwards. And one year, this is the January or February, and one year I was up really early to catch the first plane out of Boston for back in Toronto, and one of the reporters, this Sports Illustrated guy, happened to be there, and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, I want to get back to Toronto. My class is having a party just outside. One of the fellas in the class for having a class party out in Caledon. Well, what are you going to do there? We'll probably play a little bit of ice hockey and such. And they did an article. They couldn't believe that an international caliber athlete, that the coach would allow him to go and play a dangerous sport like ice hockey in the middle of the season. But we used to do things like that. I mean, we didn't, we specialized in a way, but it didn't stop us from doing other things too.
Yeah.
Anyway, so there's a little bit of difference, but it's not dissimilar to what Paul was saying either. But we did a lot of things in that.
The only difference in my career, and I keep wondering if we can get Bill out again, is that I kept running into my master's years. And in a couple of years, I will turn 60, and I'm looking forward to getting into a new age group to running at the World Masters Championships. And I think, Bill, you'd be great in there.
No, I used to run a little bit of twilight meets or such, but not in my events. I would run the 400 hurdles or something like that.
Yeah.
The one thing is that I always said I wanted, when I turned, I'm not sure if it was 50 or 40, I wanted to be able to beat my children at 400 meters. My first two kids were girls, and I could beat them. And I helped help coach one of the girls at their high school. She went to OFSA in the 400 and the relay. But I could, and I do some of the workouts with them, and I could beat her then. But no, I never wanted to go into the Masters competition. And my main rationale was that when I was running pretty serious and training pretty hard. And I never wanted to do that again. I would do things just for fun of it. So I play ice hockey, and I play golf, and I play tennis. But I never wanted to run because I never wanted to be put in a position where I felt like I had to train hard again. So
yeah, that's why I took about 15 years off of racing on the track.
Yeah.
And then I went back, and to your point, it's not hard training. It doesn't mean that when I'm on the track doing a workout, it's not a hard workout. Yeah. But yeah. I'm not killing myself every day working out. I'm having fun and enjoying it.
Yeah. Well, that's important.
Similar to you, I've got actually a standing bet with my children, my two daughters, that when I turn 80, I'll still be able to beat them in a 400-meter race. So
How old will they be?
They will
How
be
old will
in,
they be?
they'll be in their late 30s. So I'm still tracking well. No, sorry, they'll be in their late 40s. They'll be in their late 40s. So I'm tracking well on that
Yeah,
so far.
I'm 80 now. I couldn't do that. I remember a couple of years ago, my youngest daughter said, "Oh, Dad, I forgot to tell you something. A week from Sunday, I'm going to run in the Toronto Marathon." And I says, "What in the world for?" And she says, "For my 40th birthday." So on her 40th birthday, she ran the Toronto Marathon, and she it was about a minute or two faster than what her target was, but that was still around 3.5 or 4 hours.
That sounds
I could
like
never do that.
no. I'm
I
saying
could never do that.
when I was in my late 30s, I said I'm going to train for 2 years to run a marathon when I turn 40. And I did a half marathon and I said, no, I'm not doing a marathon. There's no way.
No.
Not a chance.
No.
Not a chance.
Yeah.
One half
I don't have a
marathon
psychiatrist,
was
so-
enough. Yeah, exactly. It hurts too much. All right. So,
Terrific. Well, gentlemen, thank you both so much for your insight and your time. It's been really great hanging out with you and chatting all things track and the Olympics. And Bill, I really hope you enjoy the last couple of days of competition.
Yeah.
And yeah, really, really special to have you on today. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
agreed. Always a pleasure, Bill. Look forward to seeing you in person.